All right, for more, let's bring in our panel. Pat Fallon is a congressman from the great state of Texas. We're also joined by best-selling author and political analyst Mark Halperin. His show right here, Focus Group, every weekend on Newsmax. Mark, I want to go to you first. The 9/11 Commission also faced pushback before it was even established. So does this have any shot of passing?
Look, I've talked to a lot of Democrats and Republicans about this, Carl, and I think to me, this essential tension is, can we take the politics out of it? I think everybody wants to understand what happened to make sure something like this doesn't happen again. I think that's a shared agreement. Where there's disagreement is the other goal that the Democrats clearly have, which is they want to establish Donald Trump's placement in the events of January 6th, more specifically than they've been established. And I think if that's their emphasis, if that's what they're trying to do, then this is going to stay very partisan. And I don't think the Democrats should want that, and the Republicans certainly don't.
Yeah. So, Congressman Fallon, you were in the chamber and actually helped protect the door yourself while all the other Democrats skedaddled out of there. So, you obviously voted against this. But the other thing, too, is if it does happen, Republicans have equal veto power for some of those subpoenas. So tell us a little bit about that.
Sure, Carl. We're worried about the politicalization of this because it smacked of impeachment 3.0. And if you want to talk about all political violence and examining it, why aren't we also, I think this commission should also look at the BLM and Antifa protests. I mean, you're talking about protests that spread over 140 cities, caused $2 billion worth of damages, cost 24 Americans their lives. And in two major cities, the protesters took over portions of those very cities, major U.S. cities. But they want to ignore that. So this seems, again, it smacks of not only politics playing a role, but selective outrage.
Yeah, I know, it does seem a little bit crazy to me. So, Mark, speaking of that you have, Joe Biden just cut down this infrastructure bill, which is, in the same vein of controversy as this new commission. So he said Republicans are still saying no. And I mean, could it be because that we just don't want to spend another $2 trillion?
Well, the gap in money is huge, Carl, and it's not just in terms of the gap in spending, but also the gap in taxes, and the nature of the taxes. So the White House put up an offer yesterday. The Republicans in the Senate didn't react particularly favorably to it, but the ball's now back in their court. And let's see whether either side is willing to make substantial movement in the other direction. Right now, if you credit their numbers, and both sides' numbers I think are a little bit funny numbers, but if you credit their numbers, they're still about $1 trillion apart. And even in today's Washington, $1 trillion is real money.
Yeah, it's crazy, Congressman. President Biden's talking, taking his message to the communities, and he's also, trying to get this down to a state level where inevitably you will see this, and we always see this with Congress, like, oh, if you get on board with this, you, Congressman, you'll get a dam in your thing, and you'll get a bridge over here, and you'll get a road there, and we'll build schools here, and all this stuff. So they're basically making local promises for local jobs. It's like Santa Claus. I mean, how do you compete against that?
Yeah, it's like he's, earmarked Joe now. He's just trying to please his radical base. I mean, the original proposal was almost $2.3 trillion, and then they revised it, and it's $1.7 trillion. So, as Mark just said, there's a lot of arbitrary numbers being thrown out there. We want, and by the way, what is the definition of infrastructure? I thought it was roads, bridges, highways. And the Democrats' definition, it varies greatly. They're trying to say that things like universal pre-K and climate justice and paid leave and police accountability, those are just all buzzwords for, pleasing the radical socialist agenda and not actual real infrastructure.
Right. Well, we're going to come down to another one of these, whether we had the bailout that funded shrimp running on treadmills underwater or something. We are in the middle of a troop drawdown from Afghanistan, but President George W. Bush came out against the move. Let's bring back our panel to discuss. Pat Fallon is a congressman from Texas. We're also rejoined by best-selling author and political analyst Mark Halperin. His show, Focus Group, also right here on Newsmax. Congressman Fallon, I want to go to you first on this. Look, I was a SEAL in Iraq when we started the drawdown. The way we did it was hasty, foolish, and made the problem worse. It created ISIS, and now Joe Biden is doing the same thing. What do you make?
Well, Carl, first of all, we can't thank you enough for your service. We're a deeply, deeply grateful nation. Listen, you need to meet conditions, not some arbitrary date. I'm worried about, and I think President Bush and so many others, and I serve on the Armed Services Committee, and we got some briefings, both public and classified, on this. This is about the time, talent, and treasure and lives that have been expended and sacrificed over nearly 2 decades and to just arbitrarily set a date. We're talking about the Taliban here, a totalitarian regime that cannot be, and now, in opposition. But we can't trust them with their words. We need to look at action. So if certain conditions are met, we can draw down and possibly withdraw. I mean, a complete withdrawal in an unstable country like Afghanistan, and particularly at this juncture, is incredibly unwise.
Yeah,
and very
Mark,
dangerous.
I mean, look, I trust gas station sushi more than I trust any deals from the Taliban. But we have to have the serious conversation here. It's like, look, we know that if we leave, there will be a power vacuum. Period. Fact. End of story. We know that if we stay, we risk becoming involved in nation building. My stance has always been, if you send troops there, send them to kill bad guys. Don't build schools. Don't, be present and things like that. If we're done, get us out, send in diplomats. When that fails, which it will inevitably, because for thousands of years, diplomacy has made no impact in Afghanistan, whatever. So, what do you think about the notion that we may have to go back into Afghanistan at some point?
Well, first, Carl, I'm a little offended about what you said about gas station sushi, but I'm going to overcome that to address your question.
I deeply apologize.
The reality is that there's no good way to win this war through force or diplomacy. And Donald Trump got elected in part because tens of millions of Americans said, you know what, we understand the stakes, we understand American security, but this has gone on long enough, we're not going to win this militarily. So I appreciate the congressman's kind of critique of the reality. You got to do this right. But what President Biden doing is standing on the shoulders of Donald Trump, building on what President Trump maneuvered right up to. And it's where I think the mood of the country is. As much as there's a risk in leaving, there's a bigger risk for more Americans in staying. Special forces will be there. And I think they'll be able to kill bad guys as part of the remaining mission. Yeah.
I mean, ideally, we hopefully do that, but I worry about creating that power vacuum there, and I think it's a bad news. But Congressman Fallon, I want to go. California Governor Gavin Newsom, he's facing this massive recall, rightfully so, because he's a terrible governor. But this Netflix executive, Reed Hastings, is shelling out $3 million to beat it. I mean, will it work?
Well, I think clearly Netflix hasn't canceled their subscription to woke politicians. But listen, throughout the pandemic, a lot of big businesses did very well, extraordinarily well, and Netflix being among them. But most small businesses suffered terribly. And you see this great divide now between big business that are cozying up to the Democrats. And it's almost as if, Carl, like as Churchill said, they're hoping that the alligator will eat them last. Yeah. Socialism and the socialists are coming for them. And usually it was only the pro-business Republicans and a few Democrats that stood in their way. And now they're embracing them and hugging the very alligator that's going to eventually eat them. It's bizarre.
Yeah, I'm glad you actually mentioned the eat them last sort of thing. Is the whole thing, Mark, when it comes down to it, when you have these big government liberals who just absolutely love government, who wants to tax them more, none of them ever give anything other than the bare minimum. There is a place on your tax form, I know because we just filed them, there's a place where you can check, I would like to give more money. Why don't they give more money? Mark?
Well, some in Silicon Valley do. Look, Netflix executives have a lot of money because Netflix has done very well during the pandemic. I got to be honest with you, Carl. I know some of your viewers won't want to hear this, but Gavin Newsom is in a stronger position now politically than he was when the recall process began. And those who want to get him out are going to have to redouble their efforts and find ways to raise money against him, or this process is going to be a very anticlimactic process, and he's going to have the political strength that will come from having survived it.
Yeah, well, we'll see how that works out for him if he gets his way. Congressman Pat Fallon, Mark Halpern, we appreciate you joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carl. God bless.